Coming to you from the city of the weird. Exploring topics from the esoteric and unexplored to dimensions unknown. Shining a light of truth on the darkest corners of our reality. Welcome to the Curious Realm.
Well, hello everybody and welcome back for our final part of coverage here at the 2023 Fouke Monster Festival here in Fouke, Arkansas. We love coming out to these events. We love coming out, talking to the speakers, talking to literally the people here. I don't know if I could go through one of these events here at Bigfoot Central without having you on the show. So welcome back. Daniel Allen Jones from the Vortex, everybody.
Hey, Christopher, great to be back here once again.
Always
in
great
Fouke,
seeing you,
Arkansas.
bud. Yeah. It's we're at a new venue. It's fantastic. Great to see a larger crowd able to be serviced, and great to see a show like this be able to grow and reach new audiences. We had a ton. As opposed to last year, we had a ton of kids here this year. Younger, junior high age kids. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, I think so. It's really cool to also see that it's in a school. You know, I think it's not something that's probably easy for other school buildings to be able to use for things outside of their own programs. And here in Fouke, you know, this is something that's become integrated in the history of the town. And I think it's fun for people, not just, people coming out from wherever they are, venturing from, but the locals here to know that we have an annual festival. We can celebrate. We can get all the, people that make wares and goods and crafts and things together, have the kids come out to talk about some strange history and some, fun ideas that may help them get out into nature and explore these possibilities. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, well, and it's like Jeff Crypto Hulk Stewart said in the Q&A just a few minutes ago, just the fact of it's the camaraderie. It's the fact of being around people of like mind and being able to swap stories, share stories, standing here in the hall and just hearing people share unabashedly what their experience is. It's beautiful. It's amazing. It really is. It's one of the only communities where I don't see people snitting at each other and infighting, so to speak, and this. There really is a support for each other's experiences that I don't see in a lot of other communities that I support shows for. Nothing wrong with it. I just find that the cryptid community in specific is really, I think, together in that way. Very much like we're out in the woods together. We're in the thick of it together with this.
I think so. And there are some, different opinions and stances on, various ideas of what's going on with Bigfoot or these other creatures or cryptids, and I think that that's understandable. You kind of have that issue with any of these interesting subjects, but the main thing is that everyone's curious about what's going on and whether they're out there to try to prove it or disprove it or debunk it. Everyone's trying to make sense of what's happening out in this world that we all live in together, and we want to make sense of not only how it affects us, but maybe if there are creatures out there, whether it's Bigfoot or any number of these other mystery animals or anything else, that we have to also acknowledge that, and as they discussed on the panel, that if we make any discoveries and we declare that to the world, it's not just fun for us to learn about new stuff. That's great and all, but it also affects how they are going to be, affected with announcing that to the world.
How conservancy happens, how it affects so many things, how forestry happens, everything.
Right.
And that's just it. The impact of it is so much more than just, well, here it is.
Right.
It's not just like finding of a compound and, well, there's your compound. It impacts a lot. It impacts a lot socially. It impacts a lot government-wise, things like that. So, and a prime example that we've been talking about a lot lately is just the change of conversations with UFO, UAP, and the fact that here in the last 2 years, we now have an annual federal UFO, UAP report. Never happened before. Now we have a funded report. We want updates every year. What's going on? We now have a unified reporting system. Aside from MUFON, that never existed. There was never here is the unified way to report. if a United Airlines pilot reported it, A, you probably lost your job. B, their system of reporting it was totally different than American Airlines or Delta or what the Navy did or what Air Force pilots did.
Yeah.
Now there is a unified means to get data. And when you're talking about just stabbing in the dark at data, there's nothing scientific about that. You can glean nothing scientific from it. So to have the unified system of reporting, now you have a means of classification of data. Now you have a means of like, these cases are more important than this. These tend to be the trends. Even the fact that I was talking with somebody earlier, the fact that there's no map of tracks that have been found. Why is there not an interactive GPS map of tracks that have been found? Even at that point, you would be able to, from an overhead point of view, if you had them all GPS pointed, you'd be able to go, hey, look, here's a trail that they seem to be following. Like,
Right.
just that data alone would open up a whole new realm of study, literally into a cryptid species.
Well, I think you made a good point. I mean, a lot of people sometimes when you talk about UFOs and then Bigfoot, there's a lot of discrepancy in how those two ideas relate. But aside from that issue of are Bigfoot and UFOs related at all, if you just step outside of that and just say, if you look at how the issue of reporting the phenomena, reporting these ideas that people are experiencing encounters and seeing things, whether they are UFOs or whether they think they're Bigfoot or whatever, Sasquatch, whatever it is, if there is some kind of way that people can utilize a system like you're saying that's going on for the recent UAP activity with the government, if they had an opportunity to do that with Bigfoot, it might allow us to have a little bit more structure in the reporting system, because there are organizations out there that, like UFO groups, have been doing this for a long time, but they're pretty much just independent, or they're backed by people who have gotten together to try to make sense out of all this on their own.
And that's just it. A lot of people, you're involved in a lot of the same communities I am. A lot of people in these communities are very upset with MUFON because they will not accept their evidence. Unfortunately, when MUFON started, their scientific protocol was witness statements. If you did not witness it, we have no evidence. So that's where their scientific process begins, is with the witness. So unfortunately, if your Ring camera caught it, that doesn't mean you witnessed it. You caught something, but it doesn't make you a witness.
Right.
And a lot of people get upset about that. But when you're talking a scientific definition of evidence and an evidentiary process, it is important to put that out first, front forward.
I think so. And, one of the things you can see, and I presented on this recently a few weeks back at another event, that there are parallels to what you just see.
Absolutely.
What you kind of find in the reporting process of both the idea of UFO encounters and cryptid or Bigfoot encounters. Not to say that those two things are directly related. Some people might say they are. But aside from that idea, the working process that someone would go through to in an attempt to research and investigate the case files and the data that is available does have a lot of similar input. You have to talk to witnesses who, just as you just mentioned, sometimes not only experience something that may seem to them very compelling, but they might see something, hear something, maybe they'll smell something, they might have a sensation.
Physical sensation.
And all of these things you can see also in the world of Bigfoot. The whole idea with Bigfoot is that some people say, well, I might have seen something, I might have heard something. They might have gotten a sense of, looking at something that could have potentially been constructed by a creature. And I think that if you look at all of these different things, some people, they might not have claimed to see one directly or see Bigfoot and encounter it that way, but because of the circumstance around whatever they think happened, they feel strongly that that's what it was. Whether they heard a vocalization, they heard a wood knock, they saw structures, they saw what they interpret as some kind of form of communication or gifting or whatever it is. And I think that all of these different things that people describe build a very interesting sort of conglomerate of anecdotal evidence that you can take into at least two major situations. A court of law, where a jury might be susceptible to to data and might
Sure.
not always, choose the actual outcome, but they can be persuaded by certain things.
That's right.
The other would be basically take it into a lab setting where you have to be able to
Yes.
demonstrate it in a certain way. And that's different than in a court of law where you have people who can be persuaded and susceptible to
It's
that.
interesting that you say that because I've had Tobe Johnson and oh my God, his name just left my head. The creators of Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and one of Tobe's previous projects that he's still working on is the Owl Laboratory, and it was basically a bunch of kind of paranormal Sasquatch parallel things that were happening. But he, just like you said, started taking these things like gifting. Okay, let's take it out into the woods and put it into a laboratory setting. And let's start leaving gifts and chronicling what happens in this one spot where gifts are left. Things like that. So seeing somebody like that who's actively taking the concept of a lab practice, let's take this on a concept of we're going to experiment, take the data, cull down another experiment, and repeat the experiment, and keep doing it. Yeah, some of the information that they've gotten is really remarkable. Owl Moon Lab. Check it out. Tobe Johnson.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff.
Well, that sounds interesting. I think that it's just one of those things where a lot of times that seems to be a really important part of the process of getting information. But one of the things that we find that happens within the community of those interested in these things is that really doesn't happen as much as maybe people feeling convinced by charisma, by stories, by the idea that maybe it's almost in some way a faith-based concept. They
Sure.
don't necessarily have to see the physical proof, but if you
absolutely.
sound and seem sincere enough, then
Yeah.
they'll say, "I believe you." And that's one of the challenges, but also it's a double-edged sword
It
in
is.
some way.
It is. And you've heard me say it. I've said it to you. I say it on the show all the time. The whole reason I do this show is because I have had experiences. Like my path of spiritual exploration came about because of a religious experience I had in the middle of Mass. None of the other hundreds of people there on that Sunday had that, felt that presence, saw that light. None of them. But I did. That was unquantifiable to anybody else.
Yeah.
But it changed my life. It changed my life. And that is utterly a matter of faith. There is zero evidence to that. Nobody else witnessed it. I talked to the priest who was up in the middle of everybody. He's like, I didn't see what you were talking about. But if that's what you felt, Chris, you might want to explore that. You may want to check into that. And it took an open-hearted, open-minded priest telling this altar server that, if that's the experience that you just had at the altar, you should explore that. You should venture forth into that. And that's a hard, even now, I'm getting kind of choked up because it's a hard road trying to find a truth, trying to find your truth, period.
Yeah.
And a lot of this, man, when they are life-changing experiences. They're life-changing.
It's amazing, and it's good that maybe, and in some way, he was encouraging of you to consider that rather than the opposite and saying, "Well, that didn't happen, and that's just
or
whatever else."
Man, I don't know. Wearing this collar's like, you ready for 9 years minimum before you get a collar? You cool? Like, there were a lot of things he could have done other than encourage me.
Yeah,
And other than listen to that moment and listen to my experience and just accept the experience for what it was, not try to justify, not try to. And we're in an interesting place in our society because, yes, in one part, Daniel, we are dealing with confirmation of belief. We all want confirmation of what we believe, period. We all want to know that, like, A, we're not crazy. Doesn't matter. Even my religious experience, I wanted to know I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the only one that felt something like that in that room. But at the same token, man, as a society, we are dealing with a confirmation bias
right.
out the wazoo. And the
yeah.
fact of when presented with heaps of beyond anecdotal, actual factual evidence, people are willing to put that aside, and don't get me wrong, still have your belief, which is a beautiful thing. But on a flip side, it can also mess up a lot of the science
Yeah.
and a lot of the hard boots on the ground research
Yeah.
that's being done, and it muddies that water.
I think so. I mean, you just made a good point. I think it's part of the human condition. I don't know
It
that
is.
we can ever get around
You won't.
having a sense of our own, not just individual outlook on a situation, whether that, is as a sort of a thought, a feeling, a belief, a worldview, all of that. As individuals, but also as a social group, a collective. And in a greater sense, you can see that it's like what you said, confirmation bias is a big part about how I think certain cultural groups can either work together towards something, whether they're developing in a way that seems constructive or not, they're doing something in some sense to help reassure themselves of that notion of whatever it is that they've come across, in the sense that, like, let's say you just mentioned having a belief regardless of what the science says or the data, the facts, any of that. And I think that with how people present information, it can be incredibly articulated and done in such a way that you'd think it'd convince anyone. But that's not always the case, because even though it's like, wow, that sounds really interesting, and maybe I'll change my mind a little bit, I might still hold on to that, whatever it is. And I think a lot of people are in that place to where in our own sense of worldview, we still cling to those ideas in a way that, we as ancient people have always had with us. And I think that that's something that really will be integrated with us as we continue to go into the future. And it'd be hard probably to get out of that.
A prime example is the recent NASA study here in the last year, where they put forth another study about what could be the possible implications. And a lot of the headlines were like, NASA hires 12 theologians. And it's like, well, they brought some theologians in to conceptually talk about the philosophic impact to mankind. Because, if you're going to talk about something that's going to literally shake the foundations of mankind, history as we know it, science as we know it, everything, if it's that 3% that it might be, you got to talk to somebody that are used to dealing with things that are beyond reality, man. You got to talk to people that are ready to tackle that paradigm shift that happens and that people crisis deal with regularly when it comes to faith.
Well, I think that one thing that we've talked about on multiple shows that we've done is that not only is it something that a lot of people in these communities already they're already discussing these ideas. They're already trying to understand what's going on with the community. But aside from that, just people that aren't really into this, or they're indifferent, they don't really know anything about it, they rely on a lot of the mainstream media sources, all of the things that most people kind of look at in a way that tells them what's going on in the world. As a way to think or say, well, I guess I can, add that to my standard of what I believe to be true, or how I construct my reality. If they heard it from some guy down the street who said, hey, I saw a UFO, or hey, I saw a Bigfoot back in the woods, they'd say, you're crazy. But the moment that someone on the news comes out and said, that UFO that was over there, it was real, or that Bigfoot was in the woods, that's real too, they'll say, okay, now I believe it. And the thing that I want to make a point about is that I think that it's something that we as a society have to try to come to terms with, is that in this group, a lot of times it's preaching to the choir, but it has to be done in a way also that helps to elevate the standard of awareness in society to a new place, to where it's not really just reiterating the same thing between the same people, but it has to be shown that, as you just mentioned, with something like the NASA study, which is coming up in I think in a month or two, they're supposed to finish up this study that cost $100,000. Not really a lot of money, but the interesting thing to think is that if whatever they do and they come out with results, if they decide to publish anything, despite people for decades talking about this and with strong sense of direction of credibility and all of this stuff, despite all of that, you'll still have people say, no, it's all nonsense. But until NASA says something about it, they'll say, well, now I'm a believer because NASA said so. So until we have someone...
Now that the other 90% has okayed this 5%. I'm cool with the 5%
Yeah,
now.
because everyone else
Yeah.
that's been saying it all the whole time,
Well-
is going to say I feel maybe vindicated or not. But the thing is that it's just one of those
Rightfully
weird
so.
situations where it's like,
Well-
people have been saying this for years, but it has to be sometimes those big names and recognizable things in
Yeah.
society that people know to feel like I can feel a confirmation at that point.
I feel okay with accepting this knowledge from this source. And Jeff Crypto Hulk Stewart and I were talking earlier about the fact of, and as a former law enforcement officer, he was like, one of the things I asked a training officer one time in a training was, how come we accept the evidence from this female person over here because they're a judge or a lawyer or a police officer, and we will believe what they say by 98 percentile? But this person over here who works at the drugstore or works at the package shop selling liquor during the day and says the exact same thing, we don't believe them at all. We have no anecdotal evidence to say that this person that works at the liquor store is any less viable
Right.
than that lawyer, that judge, that minister, who you consider a person of impeccable stature in the community and a trustable source of truth. There's no, by all standards of the justice system, is that person not innocent until proven guilty? So shouldn't you believe them until proven otherwise?
Right.
Just curious.
No, I mean, I think you just said it. It's just one of those things where in society we rely heavily upon positions of authority to give us, a sense of what's going on.
Sure.
And it just is a challenge that I think we all face, is that everyone kind of enters in, I think, level playing in the playing field, just very level. But that's not really the case, because in society we rely upon government officials and law enforcement and judges and people that have some kind of a say in societal things. And that isn't really just me looking at it that way, but I think that the most part, people look at that type of situation a lot and rely on those credible sources rather than just some guy or some person who doesn't have any notoriety or have any basis for an official stance. And I think that's where we find ourselves having a lot of challenge with trying to give other people an opportunity who otherwise we have no reason to, but no reason really not to, like you said, that we don't know why we shouldn't
believe them. Do you know them to be a liar? Just curious,
Right.
And that's why, like I said, because of my experiences, I will always choose to believe the experiencer until proven otherwise. And I am a believer's believer, but I am also a skeptic at heart. And I look at things scientifically. I try to look at things as dispassionately as possible and remove my emotion from the decision. Because what I believe holds no weight to evidence. It's either evidence or it's not.
Right.
And I don't know, just it's one of those, as someone who for the last 25, 30 years of my life has spent either editing audio, video, shooting. I've either spent it behind a lens or behind a microphone. So, I'm sorry if I can spot a lot of anomalies that pop up. I'm sorry if I break a lot of hearts. But my job as a skeptic isn't to do that. My job as a skeptic is to have my mind changed.
Yeah.
My job as a skeptic is to keep, despite what I believe, to keep allowing data to come through my filter dispassionately and go, ooh, well, that totally changes the way I interpret that.
Right.
Wow, my mind's changed. That's the job of a skeptic.
Yeah.
Literally. and once again, we look at it differently as society. As a skeptic is here to take somebody's idea and just poke holes in it. It's like, no.
Yeah.
You're looking at it in the wrong way, and because you're looking at it in the wrong way, we're literally having a problem in a scientific wall here.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things too where, the idea of skepticism gets a bad rap. I consider myself skeptical.
I consider you very skeptical.
Not in a disregarding sense,
no.
but because, and we're on Curious Realm, it makes me curious to wonder what's really going on. If these people and these situations and of this history shows us very specific things, patterns, data that we can maybe try to, find ways to, get answers to, I think that should make anyone skeptical, not in a disregarding way or just a dismissive way, but to question further, to
It
be
should
more
be a
curious.
piqued interest way.
Yeah.
It should be like, whoa, wait a minute, I didn't realize that. Show me what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it should be a piqued interest, not a, like a shut door. And that's just it. Like, that's the whole reason I started this show. Even the iteration of this show before this was, it's the conversation. I don't care if we agree intrinsically whatsoever. The important thing, Daniel, is that we talked.
Right.
That I open-mindedly listen to what you believe and why you believe it and leave it at that. I don't care if it changes what I believe. I genuinely, as a human being, want to know what you believe and why you believe it. And leave it at that.
Yeah.
Like, let's have a conversation about humanity and us and where we're at. And without these deep topics, it's not going to happen.
I mean, I think it's one of those, it's part of how we grow as a society in our outlooks. We can't all see and think and explain things the same. And I think that's, one of the things that we face in a lot of these different topics and communities, especially with Bigfoot, because I think that, and it's not just that. You mentioned UFOs as well.
Sure.
We would be naive to think that there aren't, a lot of times where people aren't just being disingenuous, but they just maybe they do mean well, but they just aren't very good at identifying things, or they're not very good at assembling, or having a recollection that is very coherent. They try to remember something the best they can. And it's not they're intentionally lying, but maybe they did have something happen, or maybe they didn't. But that should be something, I think, should allow people to see that, yes, we do know that sometimes that happens, but at the same time, that we do know, unfortunately, that there are people who try to do what they can to take advantage of people. And I think that also is another reason, not the only reason, but it's another reason for my own personal skepticism, because I know that it's important to be to use discernment with any of this stuff, because not only is it interesting, it's fascinating, it makes me curious, but I also have to make sure that I'm not just being so open that I'm believing everything I hear everyone say, because I think that's one of the things that makes us feel very confused
it's that
later
want
on.
Of confirmation.
Because you hear mixed things, and you suddenly hear, well, I thought this was real, and this other person's saying this too, and now I'm feeling mixed in how that works. And it's really because I think people are excited. They're anticipating what they're hearing because it feels right to them. And I think that's where you said a moment ago, it's like when you start kind of getting your emotions involved, you have to be very careful, depending on someone's involvement. Like my involvement might be different than someone else's involvement. Someone might be just enjoying this as an enthusiast.
Sure.
If you're a researcher or an investigator, you might have a different set of standards to adhere to when you're trying to collect data or do research in a way that you're not letting your emotions get the best of you, but like you said, just kind of look at it dispassionately.
Yeah.
And everyone's got a different approach, and I think that's what makes this a very interesting, diverse field and community, not just with cryptozoology within the Bigfoot community, but things like UFOs and all these other strange, interesting topics that bring us all together. So there is unity to it, but there is a lot of stratification. I think that, like you're saying, we look past the differences. We can be civil, we can have discourse, and keep the conversation going. I think that adds momentum, and in some way can help provide a sense of support with people who otherwise wouldn't want to share anything.
Exactly. And that's just it. That I think right now societally is what's happening, is the conversation is being had. And because of things like the UFO UAP panels, the now annual report, it's okay to say something.
Yeah.
It's okay to say something. It wasn't okay to say something before. It didn't matter if you were Air Force, United Airlines, U.S. Navy. It was not okay to say something, Daniel. We paid millions of dollars to train you to be the observer and to use the billions of dollars. Like, each plane is $1.6 billion. That's a B, dude. I don't care what car you have and know how to drive. You do not know how to fly a plane like that. All right? That dude has millions of dollars of training put into him to fly that billion-dollar instrument.
Yeah.
And operate it and know everything integrally about it and how it works and how it operates. And when he comes back and says, yo, there was some weird stuff going on. Suddenly he's not $1 million piece of equipment anymore.
Yeah.
That's mind-numbing to me. But that was literally the situation we were in. It was not okay to talk about it. But once it is, it was amazing to see how fast the first questions at the UAP panel were called together for MUFON stuff. It was amazing to see how fast a panel happened to get a unified reporting system done amongst branches of the military and civilian services. Now it doesn't matter if you're an American Airlines pilot or a U.S. Navy pilot, you are directed to the same alphabet agency and you will be given the same form to fill out. So it's no longer a random swath of data that they're going to get. Maybe if this dude wants to report it. Now they're encouraged to report it, and there's a standardization to the reporting, which means now we can actually call data.
Yeah. I think it's exciting. I think it's important to pay attention. A lot of people look at it one way or the other. They might see it as some sort of disclosure narrative, or they might see it as the government really trying to pick up the pieces of legacy programs that have gone back decades.
I've said it numerous times on my show. The only way you get the money back from the technology you invested in is to declassify it and put it on a shelf.
Yeah, I mean
that's the only way, dude.
I think that it's
the only way.
It's tough to see how something like this will, when it comes to UFOs, be brought out in a way that isn't, from the government, going to be something that will be an attempt at funding something. And I think that when I say that, the modern iteration of this with AARO, which is AARO, it's the
Aerial Anomaly.
All domain. It's the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. So, and that's a big umbrella department for not just all the super weird exotic UFOs, but all the more conventional things that just aren't readily identifiable, like these balloons. But they recently said,
and USOs.
I mean all these things, and so transmedium and all, air, water, space. Who knows? All these different really interesting things. What's really interesting now is that there have been questions with what this group, AARO, is able to do with their current funding status, with their current clearance status, and the authorizations they need to be able to go into interagency, which is going into, like you're saying, all these different, whatever alphabet agency, whatever military branch they need to try to work with. I would love to see something like that work with the idea of Bigfoot or with cryptids, in the sense that if ever there was, a push to get this far as as UFOs have, as far as the government releases all this, it would make me wonder. We probably don't have there are reports that go back and people have kept track in different ways, but there's probably not an official unified database. Maybe there's something. And some people talk about, like you said, the Department of Forestry and all these things.
There may be some things where there are some cases called together. There may be, and don't get me wrong, there are people like the, Texas Bigfoot Research Organization, people like that who have been gathering witness statements, stuff like that. But once again, was there a protocol followed? Was there, here is your form?
Yeah.
Because if you go to MUFON, there is a form that you fill out for your sighting.
Yeah, I think it would be something helpful in the same regard if there was a process, but not only that, and there are, obviously you can go to, as you just mentioned, many of these different groups submit a report, and they might have their own way to try to compile that data for whatever reason, too. That's the other thing, is it's like you can submit a report, but ultimately you might not get much back, and it makes you wonder what exactly are they going to do with that information. But if there was some effort on behalf of the government, whether it's park and wildlife, fish and game, or doing something on behalf of conservancy and all of these different things that we see happening in parks and national and state parks and things that, try to make sense of what they know that they have as far as wildlife, and making sure that people aren't just out there, gunning things down at will, and doing the best they can with rangers and the park people. I think that, obviously, as we heard in the panel earlier, once something like Bigfoot were to be announced, if it was to be just said, we discovered it, it's real, it would be, lot to work with.
Would you be ready for a third of our national parks to maybe be inaccessible?
It would be a big challenge. I think they'd have to reconsider a lot of how to make sense of, okay, we have this real issue to deal with.
You have to remember, even places like Yellowstone, there's a good percentage of the park that is not accessible to the public. you know, because like that's where the animals go breed. Like,
Yeah.
that's not where they come and just like cross through and there's a picture spot where you can take a picture of the bison crossing the road. Like, that's where they go breed. They're not going to let you go hang out near where the bison breed because you're going to freak out the bison and they're not going to breed, you know? So once that conservancy happens and you're like, well, we have an American wood ape now, we have to conserve it. We know this is its general range. Yeah, get ready for that area to possibly be locked down to a lot of things.
Yeah.
Hunting, fishing, all kinds of stuff, because now you're talking, that's their forage range. You can't go pick berries there anymore. You can't go pick morel mushrooms there anymore. That's what they eat.
The other thing could be, you know, just like this group Arrow is doing for UFOs, you know, it serves as a catch-all for not just alien spaceships, but anything that we're trying to figure out what's going on up there or in the water.
Once again, that unidentified. Like, that's a swath when you say unidentified flying object. And we've said it numerous times on the show together. Let's just leave it at that. Let's start with just that definition, and let's leave it at, here's something in the sky that we don't know what it is. Now let's start.
Yeah. Well, you know, if in the same thing, you know, we have people saying Bigfoot as if it's this one thing, and we really don't know if it's a set species or a set of subspecies of known groups. And that's the challenge. Is it's kind of like if we had an arrow for Bigfoot, it could help show us that, you know, so-and-so saw this and it had this morphology. It was described as this shade, this color, this height, these dimensions. This other one, you know, you can kind of see where this is going. Yeah. It makes a little bit more of a possibility that if we're getting a wide variety of descriptions and reports, we might not be dealing with the same exact thing. It could be several different things, and several
subspecies,
you know, could be new species.
Well, much like in the Q&A when they were like, "How come? Why the large gap in range?" It's like that all depends on available food, breeding areas, things like that. You know, like Chester Moore said. You go down near Mexico and the Texas border, and you'll find these turkeys all over the place, and then there's a gap. And then they pick up again. In theory, they should be ranging right there in between the two areas too, but they're not.
Yeah.
We don't know why. There's plenty of food, there's plenty of range, plenty of breeding area. We don't know why they're not nesting there. They just tend to skip over it.
Yeah, and it could help us understand that, you know, it doesn't mean that if one big story, and this might upset some people, but if they go back and they say, well, you know, we in this hypothetical Bigfoot group, you know, that's trying to figure this stuff out, like Arrow is for the government with UAP and all that, UFOs. If they had this kind of group go back and they use all this super high-tech stuff and they go and analyze the Patterson-Gimlin film, and they say, you know what, this is the one big thing that everyone tries to say, and we determined that it's a fake. If this happens, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of Bigfoot's not real or fake. It might just mean that. But that would still shake a lot of people in their sense of, wow, I was so convinced. Now I don't really know what to think.
So granted, have the conversation with King Gerhard on the show regularly. The fact of he's the same way as me. I don't think video evidence is going to do it. I don't think a picture is going to do it. I don't think it's going to do it with UFOs, UAPs. I don't think it's going to do it with ghosts. That's not going to be the evidence that is the bell ringer.
Right. It's one of those challenges between a courtroom with a jury or a lab with, you know, demonstrable, repeatable things, because you could show all of that footage to a courtroom full of people and they'll say,
utterly
you know what?
Convince them.
That's
utterly
amazing.
Convince them.
And it could be all faked. And they could still fall for it. And that happens in court sometimes.
Prime example, right now in our society, there is a major artist that just refused a photography award because he literally took the subject material of the award, like, take a picture of this, and the best picture wins. He made this beautiful picture, amazing, everything else. He refused his own award because he came out and told them that he purposefully AI generated it.
Oh, wow. And that's a new
He
thing
did not
now.
take the picture, not an actual picture. So that's what we're up against.
Yeah.
They literally, like, these are a bunch of photographers. These are people who take pictures for a living and judge pictures and everything else. They couldn't tell it was fake.
Wow.
He was honest. He could have totally won that award, kept it on his shelf, and been that winner for all eternity.
Yeah.
But he blew out the system and said, hey, just so you know, I faked that. So watch it.
Yeah, I think it's tough to do that because and a lot of people are going to say, well, shame on you for doing that. But in some way, it's like it's a big eye-opener.
He's laying it open.
Yeah,
he's filleting the steak open and going, look at how the sausage is made.
Right. It's a reality that we're dealing with. Because this is what
we're up against. And whenever the Adobe software came out 5-6 years ago, where if you had 20 minutes of somebody talking, you could literally type whatever you wanted. And I want to say it was Jordan Peele that they had up on stage. And they took like part of a podcast interview from him and literally made him where he was talking about his dog and how much he loved his dog. I always kiss my dog before I leave and this and that. And then they literally, on screen, typed out a sentence. Jordan Peele's voice said it.
Oh.
In the exact inflection, in the exact way that he speaks.
Yeah.
And that was 5-6 years ago, and they needed 20 minutes of somebody. Now, whenever this happened, I was like, this is going to change Hollywood contracts. It's going to change everything. You now have James Earl Jones, who sold rights in perpetuity to his voice. So now he said, okay, you want to use my voice? You're giving money to my family. And you can use James Earl Jones 35 years from now and have him read your script for Lion King 38.
It's interesting how that changes, how things work.
But it's the fact of, that was going to change Hollywood contracts, man, because you could literally have Marlon Brando star in a movie.
Yeah.
Like, you could write a whole part for Marlon Brando and have him star in it right now, and the man's been dead for 20 years.
Yeah.
And that's freaky. That's freaky, but that is literally the technology that we're dealing with right now.
And it's just in the last few years, and that's we've talked a little bit, in times past about the idea of Moore's law and technology and improving over time.
Yeah,
and even that, the idea of how it's improving changes because with this, a lot of the AI improvements, even in just like last year, it's hard to see how this will exponentially grow and improve or alter not only how things work with, like you just said, media contracts, all of that, but how we have to try to make sense of all of this other stuff that's already very difficult to sift through and find.
We've already got clogged information filters trying to sieve all this stuff. Now you add in the concept of actual deep fakes. Not even like, here's some, maybe this could be done. Like, no, dude, any kid in this junior high with a laptop at home could do that. Literally. And the prime example is the Superman movie that came out a few years ago, where a fan went and made the 5 o'clock shadow of Superman disappear better than the Hollywood studios did. Like, he went in and fixed Henry Cavill's 5 o'clock shadow. And he was like, why couldn't y'all do this? I did this on my home computer.
Right. And it just makes you wonder, with how accessible all of that stuff is, how it's going to play a part into trying having researchers and people that are already working on this, all of these challenges and problems, to try to know that now there's this other layer, and we have to try to figure out how do we allow this to, not muddy up the waters, like you said earlier, but also, make us realize that it's not only something that's going to be available for anybody, kids, but maybe in the same way that it's going to provide challenges for us, we can use it at the same time to help see what we can do to allow it to still be a tool, and improve that way too. I think that AI can be very helpful and also very difficult. It's another one of those double-edged swords.
And it's really one of those also, Daniel, when you're talking about sifting and going through the information, first thing that pops in the head is like gold mining. You find a miner who's been panning for 30, 40 years, he incrementally finds more because he knows what other material that he may be slewing out that he could actually re-slew and reprocess and get more out of.
Yeah.
So it's like you kind of learn along the way ways to reprocess information, ways to relook at information, and ways to go, well, though this may look like a worthless chunk, let's polish over here and let's flip it and look at it this way, or let's process it in this way, and now we can get a totally different valuable lore out of it. That may be copper bearing instead of gold bearing. Though we're looking for gold, put it aside. We can still ore that out later.
Yeah.
But that takes experience. That takes somebody who's literally been sifting for years to know, no, don't put a whole handful inside your sifting pan. You want half a handful so you can get more water in there and clean it out properly so that there's not so much dirt. More water, less dirt, that kind of stuff.
I'm hopeful that if in some way AI continues to improve, that not only is it going to make things difficult for us in this way, but it might be able to help us identify those things.
Yes.
Where are those chunks?
Where
Maybe
are
it'll help
those
us.
patterns?
Yeah.
Once again, if you're talking about things like footprints, if you're talking about DNA trails, if you're talking about just traveled trails, if you're talking about tree structures, all those things would be in a localized pattern. Same way as bear scat, same way as deer tracks. No different. Same way as a human being going to the freaking grocery store and buying Cheetos, man.
Yeah.
Like guaranteed, you take the same path to the store that you buy Cheetos at. You ever think about that? Do you take a different route to work?
I mean,
No,
I think that
we're creatures of habit,
right, I think
by nature.
It's one of those things where, with how advanced even now, a lot of these AI programs are, it can detect things in a way that it might take people, the organics, time to try to figure out and look at and say, oh wow, I've been trying to solve this for years.
You
and
need
then
to coin that term rapidly before the machine picks it up and coins it for you.
I think that it's just one of those things where it's like it'll detect those patterns much more efficiently than where most of us are probably able to.
Yes.
And it's not to say that it's one or the other, but I think that we can have a way to work together.
It dispassionately looks at it.
Yeah.
It dispassionately looks at it. And if it takes an AI to be dispassionate, then let's consider it that. Let's consider it the dispassionate scalpel for information. And once it hits a certain level, let's give it to the AI.
And I think
let's see what it does with it.
It's also the issue of people that are using it, putting information in. They're inputting a sense of bias that while that the AI itself may not be biased, maybe it can be eventually, I guess. But it's an idea that the information that's going into it is provided by that user who already has a sense of what they're wanting their
prime example
program to do.
Would be Tay by Microsoft, the junior high age, like 12, 13-year-old young lady who was on Twitter that was an AI bot.
Oh, okay. Well,
that within about 3 weeks had the intelligence of about a 20-year-old and became a raving racist.
Well,
because of the dialogue through Twitter that was fed to her.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you
go.
Prime
example.
I mean, it's
it became weighed one way or the other because of the data it was given, because input.
And I think
Johnny Five would say.
It's one of those things where, if you start making that type of technology that's pliable like that, you're going to have that as a difficult thing. If there's no way to alter its you want it to be able to work well and efficiently, and I think there are ways to do that without incorporating bias. But obviously, if it's interacting with real people on a regular basis,
it's going to pick it up.
Yeah,
it's going to pick it up, and it has to learn how to spot. Well, this point of data may be a bias because of this word set.
Yeah,
what have you?
Otherwise, it's going to become so disproportionate that eventually it's going to say, "Well, sorry, organics, we've determined that the data that we've concluded." With whatever we're working on is beyond your current capacity of understanding.
Well, and that is no different than a good investigator, a good detective, being able to read somebody in a room. No different. No different. They're giving you passionately a story, things like that, but that detective dispassionately, being disconnected from things, can read that, can judge it against past situations that were similar. Let's look at the similar threads here, and hey, dispassionately, I think the dude did it. Just by my past experiences of people that are guilty, everything else, this is what I'm judging it on. Not because I know the guy from third grade and I don't like him, or because he works at the package store and I don't trust what he says. It's because they are trained observers that are trained to filter through immediate data like that. They're trained to see micromuscular movements in the face that may tell that you're lying, That kind of stuff may think, oh, it looks like he's kind of trying to think of something to say instead of just responding.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of stuff that the average person, much like the AI, can filter all that out. The average person wouldn't be able to. The detective can, but the average person hearing that story can't.
Well, and to kind of come back a little bit with how this could relate to, you know, what we're doing here at like an event here in Fouke with cryptids and Bigfoot, if in some way, and we've seen this happen a little bit recently, is if you take something like the Patterson-Gimlin film, and you feed it into an AI program, which is an attempting, it might attempt to enhance it or understand it or try to do something, you know, that film can only be enhanced so much. Once you're doing things like adding artifacts, you're altering the original film. And I think that's one of the challenges people see is they see this close-up, blown-up artwork of facial features and things. And I wonder how much of that is artificially generated, or how much of it can actually realistically be pulled from what we're working with a very old, grainy film.
Granted, grainy film, things like that. However, I will posit this, because I belong to a lot of nerd groups when it comes to AV. And yeah, I hear a lot of content creators like, how are they doing all these 4K upgrades of old film movies? It's like, well, I don't think you realize the fact that a 35 millimeter film frame captures more data than 4K. The projector just couldn't get it out. So those 4K re-reels that you're seeing are actually, like, all that resolution was there. So if he was shooting on a 16 millimeter, that would be 2K equivalent. So you could upgrade that to 2K and be adding 0 artifacts.
Well, I would hope so. And I know that there are some that do add artifacts, and I'd like to think there are some that aren't, which are enhancing it. They're augmenting its quality of what we see in the playback from whatever medium. Because you have to also keep into account that it's like so many people.
Compression ratios and blocking and pixelization, things like that. But if you're talking a pixel by pixel ratio. And like, how are they taking this 35 millimeter movie from 1980 and making it 4K now? And it doesn't change. It's because that information is already in that 35 millimeter film. We just weren't able to get all of the color scheme because of the existing projectors. Things like that.
Well, so I hope that it can help us.
Our technology is catching up to the analog technology that literally existed in the day of Bob Gimlin. And it's wild because, like, that resolution was there. We just weren't able to capture it. And the real problem is now that thing's been run through so many times, how many artifacts have been added by heat and things like that that now can't be drawn out?
If there's something that AI can do to help with that, I would only like to think that maybe it could help point out those things.
Exactly.
Like, you might not have known that this was added. This is not an original, place in the movie or the film, and so I think it's one of those things where I hope that it can help us with those things, with historic and archival information, but also moving forward in the way of, like you just said, any film, video, movies, footage, photography that is an attempt to show something.
That
maybe you can look at it, and it might, we need to not only rely on it alone, but I think to use it as a tool that shows here are the reasons why this is potentially real or not. Can probably give us a good sense, like you said, dispassionately, of what we're dealing with.
We gotta have a starting place, man. You gotta have a start on any game board, and that's the question: is with any of this, what's the starting point? Where do we start the research, and where do we go from there? Because without the starting point, without point of datum A, we don't know what fractal to start following, and it's a fractal. So I want to thank you for taking the time. I just heard applause, which means Lyle Blackburn is done speaking. Church is over, folks. We're getting ready to go in and watch the Small Town Monsters documentary. Make sure to stop on by and check that out. Daniel, let everybody know where they can go to keep up with your progress on the Aurora investigation from Aurora, Texas, and where they can go to follow everything from the Vortex, brother.
Sure, thanks, Chris. I try to do what I can to share a lot on social media. So, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. The Vortex is on YouTube, and I'm working, pretty much most every day to get this publication done. There have been some delays and some tragedies, another building fire, but I'm trying to make sense of that. I think it's important to add it as much as I don't like that happened.
It's part of the investigation and part of the story.
It's there, yeah. So I'm hoping to get that wrapped up here soon. And if anyone has any questions, I'm pretty accessible. I'd be glad to follow up. And Chris, it's been an honor to be back. And
always a pleasure.
Always looking forward to the next one.
You bet, man. Same here. And while you're online checking out everything from the Vortex, make sure to stop on by curiousrealm.com/videos. That is where you can find all of the videos from the Vortex. We embed all of our guests' YouTube channels there, so you have one nice, easy stop location to find it all. You don't have to go searching. curiousrealm.com/videos will take you right to our guest video channel and let you see everything from Daniel Allen Jones and the Vortex. He has some great presentations on there from conferences, things like that. Also some great presentations from other presenters on there. So stop on by, check that out. Check us out. curiousrealm.com is the website. curiousrealm.com/story is where you can go to fill out our contact form if you have had a brush with the paranormal, if you yourself have met a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or other cryptid, if you are a government whistleblower. Stop on by, fill out our form, curiousrealm.com/story. Share your story and evidence with us, and we will present it to our guests and try to get you some expert answers on your case. Until next time, everybody, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. That is it for us from the 2023 Fouke Monster Festival. Stay curious, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Curious Realm. Stay tuned for more guests, forbidden topics, and hidden truths. Download the official Curious Realm app and view the Knowledge Vault on our website, curiousrealm.com. Follow us on social media by searching Curious Realm. Curious Realm is available on your favorite podcast services, as well as YouTube, Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV through the APR TV app, available on all app markets. Curious Realm is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more great content or to become a sponsor of Curious Realm or other podcasts, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Thanks for listening. Stay curious, and remember, the other side is always watching.